Hi, Scott Weaver with Factory Direct Designers Workroom. Today we are going to be building a flat Roman shade. This Roman shade is a little unique because it has bars in the back of it to keep it nice and straight. And the best part about it is you do not have to sew the rings on. We're actually going to hand tie, so we're going to show you how to do that. And this whole shade takes about an hour and a half to build. Stay tuned, we'll show you how to do it next. To measure for an inside mounted Roman shade, you're going to take your tape measure up to the top and measure the inside of the window frame. In this case, it is 32 3/4. You're going to want to make a 1/4 inch deduction for the shade to make sure it properly fits inside the windowsill. So in this case, it would be 32 1/2 inches. This would be the board, be an approximately 2-inch wide board. And make sure that it fits in and you have some room for easement. When mounting this, you're going to be taking a 2 1/2 inch long screw, and you would be screwing directly up into the wood frame on both sides. For wider shades, you may want to consider putting a center screw. For outside mounted Roman shades, we're going to measure from the outside of the molding to the outside of the molding, and in this case I have 37 1/2 inches. I suggest that your shade be 38 inches or 1/2 inch wider than the outside mounted, for an outside mounted shade. The board, which would be the headrail of the Roman shade, is hung on 2 L brackets, hung above your windows approximately 2 1/2 to 3 inches high above, and it would be mounted up here. And again, you would be taking a screw, 1/2 to 3/4 inch screw, and you're going to be screwing up into the wood to secure the Roman shade to the window. Cut your fabric 7 inches over your finished length and 6 inches wider than the finished width of the shade. After doing so, we're going to take your fabric and flip it over so the face is down on the table. Next, you're going to take your lining and place it on top of your fabric, centering it exactly in the middle and all the way up to the top. Carefully measuring that you have 3 inches of fabric on each side. And you will also have 3 inches on the bottom. The next step is to press your hems in. Taking a hot iron, you're going to bring the first fold up to meet the lining. And you are going to press it. Once the first fold is pressed, you're going to fold it again, making sure that there's no binding underneath, that it is laying flat. Take some pins and pin the hems. This is a double 1.5 inch side hem. Once you are done on the one side, we're also going to stick some pins through the lining and the fabric to hold the liner in place. Turn the shade around and repeat the other. Once this is done, we are now going to measure the width of the shade in several areas to make sure that you have the desired width of the shade. After you've sewn the two side hems down, either using a blind stitch machine or a straight stitch machine, it is time to do the bottom hem. For this, we're going to use the same process of bringing the bottom up to the lining as we have previously described doing the side hem. And again, we are going to press this in place. Once we have the first fold in, we're just going to simply flip it. We want to make sure that our bottom of our lining stays right here, and we are just flipping it to the edge of the lining where the lining meets. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to stick pins in. Again, measuring to make sure that you're keeping the same 1.5 inch hem straight across the bottom. Once you're happy with the way the bottom hem looks, go ahead and sew it down using a straight stitch or a blind stitch machine. With the bottom hem all sewn, we're going to leave these sides open, and this will allow us to put a weighted bar through the bottom hem. It is now time to mark off the shade. First, we're going to deal with the length of it. Measuring down from the bottom, mark off for your finished length. The shade is already cut 3 to 4 inches extra, so you don't have to worry about coming so close to the top, and it will allow us, when we staple it to the board, to bend over the extra fabric for a clean finish. This shade measures 47.5 inches. So up from the bottom, I'm going to put a mark 47.5 inches right next to the side hem over here. The next step is to mark off for the bottom, the first row for the bottom rings. We're going to go 6 inches up from the bottom and place a mark. After that, we're going to go every 10 inches. 10, 20, 30. At this point, I have 11.5 inches over, and that's fine for my last set of rows. You want to keep it a little more than your 10 inches for the remainder of the last row. So we went 6 inches, 10, 10, 10. My last remainder is 11.5. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fold this in half, keeping our bottom hem even, and we're going to do the same marks on the other side of the shade. Keeping it lined up, you'll be able to see that first mark. This will ensure that we've marked the other side properly. Now, having both sides marked, it is time to mark in between for the rows of rings. With most shades, you would want to go 8 to 10 inches across. So be 8, 8.5, 9. So you want to pick a common denominator. In this case, from this end, the inside hem to the inside hem is where we're measuring, and it measures 28 3/4. So now we're going to play with the numbers. If I did 4 rows, it would be 7 1/8 inches. But if I go with additional, if I go 1 less, I would have 9 5/8 approximately. I am using what is called ribs on these, which will be on our website. And for this case, I'm just going to go 9.5 inches. Now I'm always working from left to right. So I'm going to put a mark 9.5 and 19. And my ruler is lined up with these vertical marks on our shades to the side. So then I'm going to go to the next one. 9.5 inches. 19. And my last row is actually about 9 3/4, but I'm working left to right, and that's fine. Just make sure that you're always working the same direction, left to right. On the very top, I am going to draw a line. This is my finished length line, and this will allow me to be able to use this line for when I staple my board on. I'll be using this line as my finished length line. Now we are ready for our rings. What I'm using today are ribs on the back of my shades. These ribs help keep the shade nice and straight, sturdy, and I can hand tie these lift rings on instead of actually traditionally sewing them on. On these rings, they have 2 different types. They have one that's that goes on to the end of it, that the little dowel slips through, and there's also the center rings. These will slide on. So we're going to first sew these on, and we're going to take the end ones, and one goes on to each, obviously to each end, making sure that the opening is going to the inside of the shade. And then we're going to use the center here and here. In order to sew these on, we're actually not sewing them, we're tying them on. I am using a number 10 crochet thread. It's a number 10 crochet thread, but I'm using it in a color that matches the front. But just to show you what it looks like, this is what it is, number 10. And so all I'm doing is I'm making a very long length of it. Like so. And I'm going to cut it off. There's no need to tie the end of this, just leave it free. At each spot that you have put a mark is where you're going to put this through. And you want to make sure you put it through both the lining and the face of the fabric, and that's why you need to match the color. So what you're going to do is just put it in just enough that it catches the front. Bring it through, leave yourself some, about 6 inches on each side of it. Go to your next one. It is also important to make sure that when you're putting these strings on, that you're going up and down with these tails opposed to sideways, because you want the rings to go on up and down in the same direction as the shade is going. This speeds up the process by quite a bit. The next step in making sure that the opening of the ring goes to the inside of the shade. Making a double knot. And securing it with just a little hot glue, a dab of hot glue on the knot to make sure it doesn't pull off. Next, you're going to do the center rings. They're just a little shorter and they're open on both ends to receive the little dowel. With this done, you repeat the process of doing the rest of the rows, and then we will cut the ribs. Once you have all your rings sewn on, you can now start measuring and cutting for your ribs. The ribs are made of a fiberglass, and they're easily cut with even just a small pair of pruning scissors or something that's a little heavier than your average pair of scissors. And you can also use various other tools to do it, but that seems to work the best. And for measuring purposes, you just want to measure from about 1/8 of an inch in from this to the other side. And you also want to make sure, since this can slide back and forth, this ring can slide back and forth, that you bring it all the way to the outer edge as far as it can go for measuring purposes. Once you have it there, take your measurement, mark put a mark on your rib, fiberglass rib, and cut off. Be careful when you cut these off. Try to cut them off in a direction away from you. Also, if you have the pair of safety glasses, a good idea, just in case it flies up at you. Take a little piece of sandpaper and just file down that end a little bit, and so you can slip it into the ring. Starting with one of the center ones, you push it through into the side and back into the last one, like so. Now you'll notice if this is bowing like this, your rib is too wide and you need to trim a little bit off of it. Once it's on, you should secure the rib by adding a little bit of glue, just a dab of glue on each one of these, just to keep it there so it doesn't fall out later. So now it's time to add the bottom bar. This is a weighted bar, of course, and you can find this at Home Depot or Lowe's. And what I'm using, you can use either 1/4 or 3/8 inch threaded rotting. And again, you'll find it at Lowe's or Home Depot. And I just cut it 1 inch less than the finished width of my shade. And you're going to insert it into the bottom hem. Just like that. And at this point, you either can hand sew the side, or if you're not into hand sewing, you can go ahead and use a little hot glue. They both work fine, believe it or not. Some people don't think that the hot glue will hold, but it does. So I'm going to go ahead and hot glue this. Next, we are going to mount the shade onto the board. This is a 1 by 2 inch wide board, and I've covered it in the fabric, but it can also be covered in lining as well. And the top of it is unfinished, because when I put my shade on it, that'll kind of finish off the top, but I do want the bottom of it to look finished off. Flipping the shade over, this is the finished length line that we had marked on the shade, goes all the way across. And we're going to take our board and we're going to put it just above that line, right across. There's my line, and I'm putting it just above the line. Keeping it even with my shade. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to staple this across, and then we're going to check the length. So the shade now is mounted using one set of staples straight across, and then you're going to want to pick it up and check the length while it's in the upright position. Have somebody hold it for you and check the left and the right side to make sure that it is even. If it isn't, you'll have to pull a couple of staples out and then readjust it. After you know that your shade is level and even, then you can go ahead and bend the balance of this material underneath and staple it. This will give the top a clean finish. And now we are going to be ready to begin putting the hardware and stringing the shade. In order to string a shade, you need to know which type of control cords you are going to be using. And we're going to start with the standard cord clutch that looks like this. It has a little brass ball, and this is the one we're going to be using today. There's also a continuous cord unit that you can also use. It looks like this. This is called rollees. And this would go on like so. And each one of these would line up with the spacers here on the shade. But today we're going to be concentrating on the standard cord clutch. And you can also check out my other videos on the rollees. To do this, we're going to be using a 1.4 millimeter cord. On the rollees, it's a much thinner cord, and I believe it is a it's a 0.09 millimeter cord. The thickness definitely has to do with the type of shade that you are using, and I highly recommend the 1.4 millimeter and nothing thicker than that through the shade. Otherwise, the cord clutch may not work properly. Too small of a cord will make it the shade not lock securely. Too thick of a cord, it'll get all jammed up in here and just not work at all. Having said that, we are going to position this on the right hand side of the shade. And by doing that, we're going to bring this up. On these, there's a little hole right here. And this is where the lift cords go through these holes that are in the shades, the lift cord, the lift rod right here. They go in just like that. So it's important to line up the screw eyes right to the center of these holes. So what we're going to do is we're going to first work with the clutch. I'm going to zoom in just for a second so you can see this a little bit better. There is a brass ball in here. This is the brass ball. And it's important that this is located to the outside of the shade. And we are going to line up the hole, the screw hole that's here, right with the first lift cord right in here, where this is going to go right here through this little hole. So, and we're also going to put this clutch right in the center of our head rail, the bottom of our head rail. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to secure this side, making sure that your brass ball is going to the outside of the shade. Next, we're going to put a screw eye in this hole using a punch. Punch through the fabric. And tighten. Now, this eyelet is exactly in line with my first bar and right where that hole is. At this point, I'm going to bring this up so I can see where each one of these holes are that the lift string is going to go through. I'm going to put a tiny hole right to the center, the bottom of the head rail, to make it easier for my screw eyes. This is going to be the shade string orientation. As you can see, the brass ball is going to go to the outside of the shade as previously described. And the lift cord goes in between the brass and the white or plastic ball in here. And that's how it goes. From the underneath side of it, you can see there are two plastic gear and it goes in between those also. Once it is there and you've got it going through, we will then show you how to place it through, because then it has to come out like so. But that is important, that it's going in between these two, the brass and the plastic gear, as you will. To do this, I like to use a punch, and I lift the brass bar up. There's two ways you can do that. You can simply just raise it, your shade up, and let gravity take hold and then place it in there, or you can just pry it up. Next step is to put your string through it. And you'll see it come out the bottom. Easier said than done. Once you have enough of the lift cord, you can release the bar. And now what we're going to do is we're going to bring it through the second hole, which is right here. It's located, there's one located on both sides of the clutch. And then for this case, it is this right here is where I'm putting the string through on this one. And there's also another one located on the other side. So in this case, I put it through here. I'm also putting it through my first eyelet, or screw eye. And then we're going to put it through each one of these like so. Till we come to the bottom one. Like that. Now we're going to tie a knot in this one. At least a double knot, followed by glue. The glue will just help so the knot does not go anyplace. And that is the first rub. Making sure that your string is going at least halfway down on your shade, you may cut off the lift cord. For the second one, you do not have to use the punch. This one we're merely going to lift up on the first one, first string, and that will separate it, like so. Now we can put the string directly in between the brass and the plastic gears. Pull it up from the bottom and slip it through the other side where the hole is, bringing it to the second screw eye and back down the shade. And again, we're going to tie off and glue. All these strings I'm putting into the center. You'll notice that on the shade, on the clutch, there is a brass bar here and here. I'm sorry, it's a silver bar, not brass. Right here and here. And you could put lift cords on either side of them, separating them. But since this shade only has 4 lift cords, I don't need to. There's plenty of room in between here, so I'm going to put them all through here. If you had more like 7, then I would be using the outer edges too to help separate the lift strings. Each time you put a string through, you're going to go through the previous screw eye and back down. shine and glue the knot. At this point, we can go ahead and trim off the extra lip cord, leaving about 3/4 of an inch left. And now we'll be ready to put our little handle on. These come in several different colors. I'm using the tan, but they also come in white. They come in also in a dark brown. In order to do that, someone needs to hold the shade up, or you need to install the shade in order to do this. Either way. Also, installing the shade, you are going to want to use minimally 1.5 inch screw. And you can put your screws any place on here. If you remember the beginning of the video, it goes up into the casing. So you're going to screw into it, which will be later on in the video. We'll show you how to do that. If you have someone available, have them hold your shade up. If not, you may have to rig something up like this or put it in your window prior. What we want to do is we want to check to make sure that the shade is raising and lowering correctly by pulling on the lift cords and then locking it to the outside, pulling the string to the outside of the shade to make sure it is working properly. You also may want to bring it down in several locations and then take a tape measure and check left and right to make sure that it is landing exactly the same. In this case, this one is perfect. You can also tell by the parallel lines going across. Having said that, once you know that your shade is working properly, now it is time to put on your little wooden lift cord. Teardrop. So what we're going to do now is we're going to adjust the length of it, and we want this going down approximately, it depends on the height of your window, but basically around the middle of the shade. And we're going to take a piece of Scotch tape. Holding these tight, you don't want anything loose. You want to make sure it's tight, but not so tight as you start to lift the shade. You'll want to take a piece of tape and firmly put it around, making sure that it is taut. And when you release it, none of the strings are coming out like so. Next, cut off the excess of string. Add your teardrop going through the center. Making a knot. sure when you're making the knot that you're not binding any of the strings, that you're getting them all. And sometimes it requires 2 knots, but in this case 1 is holding fine. So there you have it. Next you're going to pull it up. Double check that it works. Now we're going to flip it over to take a look at the other side. Now while you're looking on this side, if the shade, you start to see that the shade is not forming a memory and it is getting sloppy, then you can go ahead and bring it up and either steam it or press these folds in to keep it nice. In this case, it seems to be pretty good just the way it is. Now that we've made a shade, we're going to give you a couple of warnings about using a shade. The number 1 is always use a cord cleat to wrap these around. Secondly, if there's any children, I don't recommend the shade at all. But there's other things that you can do to protect, just in case you have children that do visit. The one is they also make a shroud tape, a shroud cord. It means that the cord is covered with a shroud of like little fabric. That can be used and that does help protect that person. But still with that, it's just a precaution. But I still caution you not to use these type of shades with children. And then secondly, what we can do to the back of the shade to help protect is to add a second liner. What we can do is add a liner, stapling it to here, and then at each one of these, hand tack the liner so it fully covers all the strings. That will also help protect for young children. But having said all of this, I still don't recommend this type of shade when you have children. Always use something that is cordless, has no cords, or if the cords are inside the shade. So now it is time to install our Roman shade, and what you are going to do is to pre-drill 2 holes, one on each end of the shade, about center of the headrail, and you want to insert these screws. I'm using number 2 hex head screws. You want them either 2 to 3 inches long. And you're just going to bring this up, leaving it even with the casing. Once you have it where you like it, reach underneath the shade and screw it in. And that's all it is to install your shade. And your shade is up. What's nice about a Roman shade is you can bring it down just partially if you want, lock it, and don't forget to add your cord cleat to wrap it up so nobody can choke on it or nobody can play with it. Thanks for watching. Scott Weaver from Factory Direct Designers Workroom.